At 09:42 a.m. on June 13, 2025, two Royal Air Force Typhoons scramble from RAF Lossiemouth. Their destination? Polish airspace, and fast. A Russian IL-20 reconnaissance aircraft has just crossed 2 kilometers into NATO territory, ignoring radio hails and flying dark. Within minutes, the Typhoons intercept the intruder, but no missiles are fired and no shots ring out. The Russian plane banks east and exits the zone, quietly, as if nothing happened. Crisis avoided. For now. But here's the thing. What if this didn't end quietly? What if the IL-20 didn't turn back? What if the RAF pilots were ordered to shoot it down? Today we're going to break down exactly what would happen if NATO took that shot and took down a Russian spy plane in the process. We'll walk you through the rules of engagement, the historical precedents, and what modern escalation might look like in 2025. Because this scenario is hypothetical, but the tensions are very, very real. And just so we're clear, this isn't a call for war. And this video isn't about cheering on violence. This is a strategic what if. It's a military breakdown of protocols and geopolitical pressure points. Because in the chessboard of modern warfare, one wrong move, just one, can shift the whole balance. So, what happens when NATO shoots down a Russian spy plane? The Russian IL-20 crosses into NATO airspace. What exactly can NATO do about it? Well, military pilots just don't pull the trigger on instinct. There's a strict playbook called the Rules of Engagement, or ROE. These rules define exactly when force is allowed and when they're not optional. Step 1 is always detection. Surveillance systems across Europe track incoming aircraft 24/7. The moment something unauthorized enters NATO airspace, alarms go off. Step 2 is identification. NATO pilots are scrambled to intercept and visually ID the aircraft, friend, foe, or something in between. Then comes communication. The intruder is hailed repeatedly on international distress frequencies. Warnings are issued, something like, "You are entering restricted airspace, turn around immediately." If the aircraft ignores those warnings, it escalates it to escort. NATO fighters fly alongside the intruder, wings tipped, making it crystal clear. You're not welcome here. But even now, weapons stay cold. Only in the final stage, action, is the use of force considered. And even then, there's one condition: imminent threat. If the Russian aircraft is heading toward a critical military site, ignores every warning, and risks lives on the ground, only then can NATO greenlight a strike. But here's the kicker. Spy planes like the IL-20 usually don't carry weapons. They're unarmed intel collectors, packed with sensors and antennae. Taking one down would be like shooting a reporter for trespassing. Legally possible, but diplomatically explosive. That's why most of these encounters end with a standoff, not a shootout. And yet, every step in that chain of command is razor thin. A missed call, a false radar reading, a pilot who feels threatened. That's all it takes to jump from procedure to incident. And once a shot is fired, there's no rewind button. You can't take it back. Now, this isn't the first time that NATO's had to make a decision like this. Flashback to November 24th, 2015. A Turkish F-16 fighter jet intercepts a Russian Su-24 bomber flying near the Syrian border. According to Turkey, the Russian jet violated Turkish airspace for just 17 seconds. But that was enough. After repeated warnings, Turkey fires. One missile, one hit. The Su-24 is blown out of the sky, crashing into the hills near the Syrian border. The pilot ejects but is killed by rebels on the ground. Russia's response? Complete outrage. The fallout was immediate. Putin himself even said, "There will be consequences." And yet, there was no war. Instead, the world saw just how high the stakes really are. So, imagine the reaction if something similar happened today. Only this time over Poland, Lithuania, or Romania. In 2025, the political climate is even more fragile. Russia is still deeply involved in Ukraine. Tensions with NATO are sky high, and the Baltics are bracing for constant airspace provocations. One downed aircraft in the wrong place could trigger a full-blown security crisis faster than it did in 2015. Now, imagine that RAF intercepted IL-20 from June 13th didn't turn back. Imagine the RAF was ordered to take the shot. Well, what happens next? Step 1 is immediate fallout. Russia would respond, fast and loud. They'd summon NATO ambassadors, accuse the alliance of aggression, and flood state media with condemnation. Air patrols near Kaliningrad would double. Russia might even activate short-range Iskander missile systems within striking range of Warsaw. Step 2, NATO reinforces. Within 48 hours, NATO would activate its Very High Readiness Joint Task Force, expert British brigades moving into the Baltics, and American Patriot missile batteries landing in Poland. A show of unity, strength, and readiness. Step 3, strategic caution. No one wants this to turn into World War III. NATO would reach out through deconfliction hotlines, prearranged military-to-military lines between Brussels and Moscow. Messages would be clear that this wasn't an attack, this was a single, targeted response to an incursion. Russia might escalate militarily, or it might spin it diplomatically. A tragic misunderstanding, perhaps. But even then, the balance has shifted. NATO had fired the first shot, and now the world watches. So while that IL-20 might be unarmed and slow, it could still carry something explosive. Consequences. So NATO shoots down that Russian IL-20. What unfolds next is a complex web of military shifts, political drama, and economic tremors, and of course, global anxiety. The first impact wouldn't be the military, it would be political. Within hours, Russia would summon NATO ambassadors and issue formal condemnations. Moscow would label the strike as an act of aggression, even if it occurred after multiple ignored warnings. Russian state media would amplify the message: NATO has crossed the line. Economic sanctions, of course, would follow. Russia would suspend trade routes, cut access to key materials, or block Western companies from operating inside its borders. NATO member states would respond with their own measures, tightening export controls or freezing Russian assets. But despite the rhetoric and all that, both sides would keep communication lines open. NATO's deconfliction hotlines with Russia, set up to prevent accidental escalation, would be burning red. Diplomats would be working overtime to de-escalate without appearing weak. On the ground and in the skies, the tone would change instantly. Expect an increase in Russian aerial activity near NATO's eastern borders. Su-35s and long-range bombers would begin flying tighter patrols over Kaliningrad, the Black Sea, and the Arctic. Electronic warfare systems would go live. NATO aircrews would face constant buzzing. Close, aggressive flybys designed to provoke a response. In parallel, NATO would reinforce its presence. A Very High Readiness Joint Task Force, its 5,000-strong rapid deployment unit, could be moved to Poland or to the Baltic states within days. Additional missile defense systems, radar units, and naval patrols would follow. Most importantly here, though, is that the escalation would remain controlled. Neither side wants a full-scale conflict here, but both need to demonstrate strength. And in this environment, even a training exercise could be misread as an attack. Behind closed doors, the alliance would face its own internal turbulence. Some NATO countries, particularly in Eastern Europe, would demand an even stronger stance. More troops, more deployments, more deterrence. Others, especially those further west, might urge caution, concerned about economic backlash or unintended escalation. The United States would find itself under pressure. With elections looming and NATO under the microscope, Washington would need to reaffirm its commitment to the alliance while managing domestic divisions. Previous rhetoric questioning NATO's relevance could resurface, especially from isolationist voices. Still, the majority view would remain clear. If NATO doesn't act decisively in defense of its airspace, the deterrent credibility erodes. And that risk is far greater than any few days of political discomfort. Then there's economic jitters, because financial markets don't wait for press conferences. The news of a NATO-Russia clash, even one involving an unarmed aircraft, would send shockwaves through global markets. Oil and gas prices would likely spike, airline stocks would dip, defense industry shares would surge. Eastern European economies would brace for cyber attacks or energy disruptions. Governments might begin rationing fuel reserves or activating emergency infrastructure. Civil aviation routes over the Baltic Sea could be temporarily rerouted, adding delays and driving up transport costs. Meanwhile, consumers across Europe would feel the tension. Supermarket shelves wouldn't empty overnight, but the anxiety would be real. In the Baltics and in Poland, air raid drills would be reinstated. Public messaging would stress calm, but everyone, of course, would be on edge. And perhaps the most unnerving consequence is the shift in nuclear posture. Russia has long embedded nuclear weapons into its doctrine, and not just as a last resort, but as a tool to de-escalate through escalation. A direct military clash with NATO, however minor, might trigger nuclear messaging, heightened alert levels, missile movement, or aggressive public statements. NATO would respond with measured readiness, no launches, no threats, but strategic bombers might be repositioned. Missile defense systems would be quietly calibrated. Exercises would proceed as planned, but with a sharper edge. This is the tightrope of 2025. It's not about pressing red buttons, it's about signaling intent. One wrong message, one misunderstood movement, and things could escalate beyond words. Even if the crisis cools within weeks, things wouldn't return to the way they once were. NATO would likely adopt a new airspace posture. More patrols, tighter no-fly zones, perhaps even pre-authorized intercept guidelines in certain regions. Russia would intensify its gray zone activities, cyber attacks, information warfare, and covert influence operations. The rules of engagement would definitely harden. Military officers on both sides would have less room for judgment, more pressure to react quickly. And that's the most dangerous outcome of it all. Not all-out war, but a world where the space for diplomacy keeps shrinking. So as the smoke clears, the world would restabilize, but on a different trajectory. NATO boosts readiness, Ukraine gains stronger defense support, Russia doubles down on gray zone intimidation. The danger here? Another miscalculation, another interceptor firing, triggering a spiral. So what have we learned? A NATO shootdown of a Russian spy plane isn't just a headline, it's a strategic earthquake. One that shakes the very pillars of diplomacy, defense, and deterrence all at once. We've seen how tightly scripted NATO's response system is. Detection, communication, interception, and finally, action. But we've also seen how fragile that system can become under pressure. When tensions run high, when warnings go ignored, and when surveillance turns into provocation, things can break. And in 2025, the stakes are higher than ever. Cyber threats, missile deployments, nuclear posturing. All it takes is one trigger. And the real danger here is not just the shootdown itself, it's the aftershocks. Military buildups, political fractures, economic panic. The fallout spreads fast and often far beyond where it even started. That's why every intercept, every radar lock, every radio warning matters. Because in this kind of standoff, the smallest miscalculation isn't small at all. Now we want to hear from you. What do you think would happen if NATO actually shot down a Russian reconnaissance aircraft? Would Russia strike back or step back? Would NATO fracture or grow stronger? Drop your take in the comments. We're reading every one. And if you want to go a step further and support our channel here directly, join the fleet. You'll get loyalty badges, priority comment replies, and help us bring more real-world military stories to the surface. Just click join on our channel page and get on board. Stay sharp, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next mission.